Okay, welcome everyone to this session 4.5 of the Monitoring and Evaluation Panel 4. And this is our last session for Panel 4, so it's appropriate that the theme is about reflection, and particularly on how we're doing evaluations and monitoring of energy efficiency. The methods we're using, are they the right ones? Can we use them better? And can we share and further standardize best practices? So our first speaker will be Nelly Renders, who is a senior expert at FITO Energieville, the Flemish Research Institute in Belgium, where she is involved since 2005 in energy and climate-related policy to support public authorities in designing, monitoring, and evaluating energy and climate plans. And she's currently managing the Horizon 2020 project Stream Save, which I think she'll talk a bit about with her topic of standardized savings calculations within Europe, exchanging EED practices to streamline theory and practice. Okay, so we should have our presentation ready and queued, and we'll go to that now.
Good afternoon, everyone. In the upcoming minutes, I will present on standardized saving calculations within Europe and how to close the gap between theory and practice. These results are based on the project StreamSave that I'm coordinating and that started in September of last year. I want to stress that what I present here today is really a joint effort from all partners involved in the consortium and mainly from the authors listed in this slide. What is the context, or what are the challenges that member states face in frame of Article 3 and Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive? As you might know, it is likely that not all member states will achieve their Article 7 savings target for the application period 2014-2020. Moreover, when the member states submitted their final NECPs, it became clear that the total of all member states' Article 3 contributions will not sum up to 32.5% reduction target by 2030 over the whole of EU. And thirdly, as you know, in the Green Deal, the efforts that will be asked from member states will have to increase, as also the greenhouse gas reduction target at European level increased until 55% by 2030. So this will imply that also more efforts will be asked from member states in the energy efficiency domain. Knowing all these challenges in relation to targets and efforts in general from member states, we also know that member states have often difficulties in calculating energy savings from the energy efficiency measures that they take or plan to take, and more specifically on aligning them with the actual savings in practice. So bridging the gap between theory and practice in terms of savings. So knowing all these challenges, we want to support member states in the project StreamSave. Our main objectives are listed in this slide. We want to build capacity among public authorities on Article 3 and Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. And here too, we would like to focus on streamlining calculation methodologies so member states can improve their bottom-up savings as well as the estimation of cost effectiveness of technical energy saving actions. In StreamSave, we focus on priority actions. What are those? That are actions with still a high energy saving potential among Europe and that are considered as a priority issue by member states. We will do this not only by setting up calculation methodologies, but we will also create an open dialogue among public authorities on the subject. And by this, so by the project StreamSave, we want to contribute to realizing additional savings by 2030 in frame of the two articles of the Energy Efficiency Directive. What will I present to you in the upcoming minutes? First of all, I will show you the status of standardized savings calculations within Europe. I will do that by explaining from where we got the data. Then we will show you the overview based on methodologies we've collected from member states' catalogs, and then a bit more insights on the methodologies itself. Secondly, we will also give you insights on the needs and the priorities from stakeholders on this subject. And thirdly, we will explain how cross-country sharing of experiences and knowledge can contribute to streamlining energy savings calculations, so in supporting member states. And in this slide, we show you our data collection process. In order to analyze the existing situation in Europe, a combination of approaches was used to collect the relevant data and to understand member states' challenges. Here you see our main data sources. First of all, we did a stakeholder consultation to understand the existing situation. Secondly, we did a desk review. We looked into the catalogs that are available within member states containing bottom-up methodologies, and those catalogs are mainly set up to support, for instance, obligated parties from an obligation scheme. Next to those catalogs, we also looked for other projects, for instance, methodologies from the former Horizon 2020 project Multi. And based on that desk review and the stakeholder consultation, we were able to set up our overview. We went one step further, namely, we also did a gap analysis. By knowing which sectors and which end users are covered by the methodologies and comparing that with Eurostat energy balances for those sectors and end users, we could identify areas where there is need for support or where there are still or where there can still be actions implemented to realize extra savings. And here you see the result, or the status of bottom-up methodologies within Europe. We collected in total 530 bottom-up methodologies from 14 member states catalogs. You can see the countries listed in the table below. As you can see, those methodologies are mainly published within member states where an EEO scheme is put in place to comply with Article 7. Next to calculation formulas to estimate the savings, most of these methodologies also include indicative values, so values for lifetime, hours of operation, etc., so the savings can be estimated by the ones using the catalogs. But what is mostly, or what is often lacking, is the estimation of behavioral effects. So what is the impact of behavior on the savings, as well as what are the costs related to this action. That is often lacking in those methodologies. Here you see another way of representing the results. The collected methodologies are classified not only per member states, but as you can see in this table, also per type of end use at the bottom, at the top of this table, and by sector at the left of this table. The result of this classification clearly shows that methodologies to estimate the savings for the sectors of buildings and related end users, namely space heating and cooling, are very well covered by the catalogs. This is in line with the policy efforts taken by member states to improve the energy efficiency in these demand sectors. However, the sectors of transport, agriculture, forestry, and fishing are less represented in the catalog's methodologies. The same holds true for the end-use categories of ICT and office equipment, process heat, such as furnaces, steam and hot water, process cooling, and domestic water heating, which are not that well covered by the catalogs. These are gaps, and that are sectoral areas where support towards member states in developing energy efficiency actions can further improve the achievement of energy savings reduction targets. During the stakeholder consultation, we indeed saw that there are saving potentials that are not yet well covered by methodologies, or that there are methodology in place, but that it is difficult, for instance, to identify the baseline or indicative values for the savings estimations in relation to the EET framework. And therefore, StreamSafe identified so far 5 priority actions or technical solutions with a high savings potential. These are listed in the figure in this slide, and that are heat recovery from industry and district heating, building automation and control systems, industrial and commercial refrigeration systems, electric vehicles, and lighting systems, including public lighting. These are the 5 priority actions which we will deal with in our first round of actions. About halfway the project, we will define a second round of actions based on stakeholder needs and on the gap analysis we did. In the slides, you can see some methodological insights on the bottom-up methodologies that we could find in the member states catalogs, and this for our 5 priority actions. What are some findings? For heat recovery, but the same applies for refrigeration, it was noticed that often extra information is required to complete or to estimate savings based on the formulas, as energy consumption, mainly meter data or installed power, is often needed. So this makes it difficult to standardize the data collection. For BACs, we could only find a limited number of methodologies in 3 member states. And we notice, but the same applies for electric vehicles and lighting systems, that behavioral effects are not taken into account. Concerning electric vehicles, the methodologies are based on number of purchased vehicles, the difference of energy consumption of the reference situation versus the more efficient vehicle, and the yearly mileage. For lighting systems, so including public lighting, the baseline is estimated based on the power of the installed lighting points and annual burning hours. So that are the most common factors taken into account in the savings estimations. What are the member states' needs on standardized methodologies for our 5 priority actions regarding energy policy implementation in frame of Article 3 and 7 of the ED? To understand stakeholders' needs, we did an online survey in October, November of last year and got 112 replies from stakeholders being really active in the EED implementation. We complemented it with in-depth interviews of public authorities. And what were the main challenges or needs that member states listed here? First of all, they said that standardized methodologies or streamlining these implies a balancing between accuracy to characterize the complexity of the situation and between simplicity to lighten the monitoring and evaluation process for the member states or the public authorities. Secondly, and this was also recognized by countries having more experience in preparing standardized methodologies, it was indicated that definition of baselines and additionalities of savings in frame of Article 7 are very challenging issues in the implementation of the EED. And it was also recognized that data availability can hamper, or not having enough data available can hamper to estimate the savings for some sectors. And lastly, but that was already clear also from our overview of methodologies, member states want to learn more on how to assess the behavioral effects or what is the impact on savings. And this was also reflected in the low number of methodologies correcting for these effects. Within StreamSafe, we will set up calculation methodologies for our priority actions so we can support the member states. But it is not just about defining methodologies. No, it's also about sharing knowledge and experience between countries so that existing practices can be shared and that the overall coverage of calculation methodologies can also improve. And therefore, we set up a series of dialogues centered around each priority action, where we will share experiences and discuss techno-economic details on saving actions. So it are really small groups of experts or people active in the field, discussing multiple aspects on one specific priority action in the format of web meetings, workshops, and an online forum. We kicked off these dialogue activities in March of this year, and more than 100 people attended, so showing the interest in the subject. At the moment, our Tuesday series are running, meaning that each Tuesday, one of the priority actions is discussed. So if you want to participate, just send me an email. So to conclude, to standardize or to streamline methodologies, it is about accuracy and simplicity at the same time. We identified so far in StreamSafe sectoral and end-use gaps on savings methodologies within Europe, and that there are sectoral or end-use areas where support towards member states can improve the achievement of the targets. And here too, we develop calculation templates and guidelines for our 10 priority actions and organize really in-depth discussions or cross-country exchanges on techno-economical details for each priority action. And in this slide, you see all partners or the 12 partners involved in StreamSafe. And if you have any question about this presentation or the project, just contact me.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nella. So I'll just see, I haven't seen any questions yet in Huva, so please put your questions in Huva, or if you're through Zoom, you can put the question in directly. But if I start out talking about the data gaps in one set, there are gaps in your overview that you find, but then you also have a theme of the data needed to actually do the methodologies, which can also be a challenge. And I think that's a challenge we hear throughout eceee across the board. Do you think your project will be helping to address the data needed for the methodologies, as well as where methodologies are needed and what kind of standard methodologies can be put in place?
Yeah, of course, we try to help there as well. And how do we do this specifically in a project? We set up methodologies, but we will also already prepare some indicative values, so meaning numbers that they can use within for their methodologies. We do that for EU averages, so meaning that we provide numbers that can be used throughout Europe for methodologies where it is important to make climate differences. We try to take that into account as well. So in that way, by using those EU indicative values, there are at least good numbers on which they can rely. And by applying the same way we collected the data, it can also be a way on how to collect data at member states level to make it even more specific to the country. So that's an immediate way in how we try to deal with that. Of course, we are also aware that there is always a possibility that there is a difference between theory and practice in savings. So therefore, setting up monitoring campaigns can also be interesting. That will be in specific country cases, we will try to help them there as well, but that is mainly important for some priority actions. For instance, for heat recovery, where it is dealing with a lot of industrial technologies, it's very uncommon or not easy to define just one value to represent all industry. So there it is more about also guiding on how to collect or how to meter it in a decent way so that the savings based on methodologies are more representative.
Yeah, and maybe also then comparable too, which is helpful for sharing best practices.
Yeah.
You mentioned also then the tension between the complexity and accuracy on one hand and the simplicity needed on another. And is this going to be something then that's part of your dialogues, is coming to that balance and where the balance should be between the two? Is this, because I think this is something that we can all argue can be shifting. So how will you arrive at a balance between those two?
Yeah, in the overall mindset of the project is indeed making sure that streamlining is possible. So in a sense, moving to the highest complexity is not always allowing for streamlining. So we have that in mind while setting up the methodologies. But in the dialogues, it clearly comes up that there are indeed differences. For instance, if you have the priority action of BEC, so building automation, yeah, you can do that very detailed at the building level by really building modeling and including all energy uses of your building. That makes it very complex, but that is then done at the building level. But of course, if you want to estimate savings more and at the national level, that becomes more difficult. So, and there we tend to go more towards energy statistics and energy averages. But that type of discussion is also indeed going on in the dialogues and clearly popped up. That's also a kind of a tension even between directives, for instance, the EED versus the EPPD. That immediately pops up also the eco design. And so balancing, is how do we come up is having also the objectives in mind of what is eventually needed also in the reporting in relation to the EED. We have that in our mind while defining it and while also triggering and looking to the differences that pops up in other areas. Yeah.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions right now in Huva. Again, we can return at the end if we have some questions for Nella that come up. And we can also put in the website maybe to the project where people can find out more, because you've invited us to join if we want and to follow your progress. Good luck with it. Thank you very much. And on to Fiona for our next speaker. Thank you, Nelly.
Okay, our next paper is on Energy Efficiency Directive 3. Can metered saving approaches support EU's renovation wave objectives? Marion Santini is going to present this. She joined RAP's Europe team in early 2020 to support its work on energy efficiency and electrification. She has a deep knowledge of the European Union's energy efficiency legislation, which she acquired during her work for the Secretariat of the Coalition for Energy Savings, which is an organisation which would be familiar to many of us in the audience. So Marion is going to present live. Pass over to you, Marion.
Thanks a lot, Fiona. I'm sharing my slide. Can you see them? Okay, so thanks a lot, Fiona. And yes, I'm Marion Santini. I work for the Regulatory Assistance Project. We are a non-profit organization working on the energy transition. Today, I'm going to talk about buildings and about the Energy Efficiency Directive. I will focus on Article 7, the energy savings obligation. And I'd like to discuss emerging trends in monitoring and verification and how they could support the EU's renovation objectives. First, let me start with some context. As you might know, the EU decided to increase its climate target for 2030. And in this graph, you see the emission cuts that the Commission expects in the residential and tertiary sectors. So this means that we should accelerate action in the building sector. And it's a real challenge, as we know, because we know that renovation rates are very low right now. And it's something also that the Commission has considered, and they published the strategy called the Renovation Wave last year. The aim of the renovation wave is to double the renovation rate by 2030. It lists a number of action points, and I think one interesting sentence in there is that the Commission suggests that member states should make more use of pay-for-performance schemes. The interest for pay-for-performance schemes is actually growing in the EU. RAP is a partner in the Horizon 2020 project Sensei, which looks at developing these schemes in the EU. Sensei provides a definition of pay-for-performance schemes, which you can see in this slide. P4P schemes are energy efficiency programs. They aim to deliver greater and more persistent energy savings. and they compensate energy efficiency resources based on the comparison of metered energy consumption and modeled counterfactual energy consumption. So in other words, the energy consumption of the building is tracked over time, and payments are either made at the end of the measurement period or on an ongoing basis. In the EU, many energy efficiency programs rely on deemed savings calculation methods. This means that the program manager makes assumptions about the savings associated with a particular intervention, and participants don't need to track energy consumption over time. They usually get a subsidy at the beginning of the project based on the equipment they have installed. What makes pay for performance scheme different is that they make use of energy metering equipment. The energy consumption of the building is tracked over time. This often involves smart meters, but not systematically. If you have a set of reliable meter readings, that's okay. And this data is compared to a baseline. The baseline shows how energy consumption would have evolved without the measure. The payment usually to aggregators is proportional to the amount of energy saved and not to the number of equipment which is installed. And according to the Sensei project with DIM savings, there is an incentive to install as many equipment pieces as possible, whereas with P4P schemes, there is an incentive to get as many savings as possible. So you would have this idea that you would get more persistent saving. I'll give you an example and then I'll move into explaining what the paper has looked into. In California, PG&E, the utility is subject to an energy savings obligation, and they implement part of this obligation with pay for performance arrangements. They have selected aggregators to deliver savings in the residential sector, and the aggregators are based on the energy savings that are delivered to their clients. Those energy savings are calculated with using metadata, following the CalTrack methodology, which is a methodology, an open source methodology, which is used widely in the US. And aggregators receive monthly payments from the utility during 2 years. The payments are proportional to the energy saved. In the EU, the main tool to drive energy efficiency programs at national level, or the main EU legislation doing that, is Article 7 of the EED, where member states must trigger a certain amount of energy savings from national policy measures. Member states have to report on the impact of these policies, and they can use 4 methods to calculate savings, as you can see in this slide. There's actually only one method which requires recording the actual reduction in energy use after the intervention, and that's the metered savings approach. What we can see from member states' report is that this method is mainly used in the industrial sector, but not very widely used in the building sector. And one reason for that could be that it has been so far too costly to track energy consumption and establish a baseline for each building. So in Europe, there is an interest in making more use of metered savings methodology to improve the accuracy of energy savings estimates. And as mentioned, RAP is involved with one of these initiatives, which is called Sensei. And with this paper, I wanted to summarize where the discussion is and discuss the potential of using method savings to support building policy. So the paper describes what increased climate goals means for EU buildings policy. It identifies synergies and trade-offs between Article 7 of the EED and renovation goals, and finally discusses prospects of using method savings in the context of Article 7 buildings programs. I'm going to focus on the 2 last points. Article 7 of the EED is not limited to policies in the building sector. But as you can see in the yellow part of this graph, a large part of article savings are achieved in buildings, according to what member states have reported. And you probably get many more savings from cross-cutting measures, which are the blue part of this graph. And these are measures like energy efficiency obligation schemes, where we know that there's also a lot of activities taking place in the building sectors. But in practice, the impact of Article 7 in the building sector is probably lower than what was expected by member states, and probably, and for sure, lower than what is required to reach the renovation and climate goals. First, many member states are not on track to achieve their obligations, as Nella was saying earlier in the session. And secondly, there are some issues related to the reliability of energy savings estimates reported by member states. This question of the reliability of savings is very relevant to our discussion. In the past few years, there has been developments in the field of energy savings measurement. This practice is called advanced monitoring and verification. So with smart meters, you get much more granular information about energy consumption. At the same time, software is now available to deal with this large amount of data. And this is opening new perspectives for the use of method savings methods. Supporters of these methods argue that they can reduce monitoring and verification costs. Because once everything is running and once your methodology is established, you need less input from engineers to account for savings in each project. And you also probably need less on-site visits, which are very time-consuming. So that is an aspect which has been captured by the literature about advanced monitoring and verification. In theory, these methods can provide finer savings estimates compared to deemed savings values. And that is especially if deemed savings values are not updated regularly or are not fine-tuned enough. But I'll come back to that point. This method could apply to individual projects. So for example, a large building like a commercial site or let's say a huge building facility, and to an aggregated number of smaller projects. And that's why there is an interest in the residential sector, because the idea that we see there, and that's what's happening in California with the pay for performance scheme that I mentioned earlier, is that using a portfolio of buildings allows making much more stable and predictions about how the buildings are going to evolve without the energy efficiency measure and with the efficiency measure. Another potential benefit that advanced monitoring and verification could bring is that it could help the development of the aggregator model in the building sector. And that is also something we can see in the literature on these methods and on pay for performance schemes. So if we take the perspective of public authorities, as I mentioned earlier, with such a system, they can deliver performance-based payments to aggregators, as it is done mainly in the US, and they can align incentives of the aggregator to deliver as many savings as possible instead of installing as many equipment as possible. Public authorities can also decide to reward time and location specific energy savings. So that is also something which is being tested in the US to deal with peak energy consumption. So you can have different rates according to when the energy savings is taking place, and that's where the frontier between energy savings and demand response is becoming a bit blurred. If we take the perspective of aggregators or energy services companies, usually it's been difficult for these companies to work in the residential sector. One of the reasons is that they had high transaction costs, as I mentioned, households can have unstable baseline, and there was a need for site visits to really understand what was going on in the building. So the proposal by advanced monitoring and verification is that these costs, transaction costs could be reduced and could allow a development of these contracts in the residential sector. Another point, which actually builds on what was mentioned in the first presentation in this panel, is that with such methods, aggregators or energy services providers can capture behavioral and operational savings, which is not possible if you apply dim savings method. So the energy service company is able to engage with the customers on the operational savings. So there are different modeling algorithms and software tools on the market. And to advance this discussion at EU level, the Sensei project has developed an energy efficiency meter based on machine learning. The tool is available online, and Sensei is looking for feedback from practitioners. So I invite you to visit the website of the Sensei project. It's really interesting developments there. To use these methods and these schemes in the context of Article 7, we should discuss a number of elements. And this includes, for example, the confidence level that we expect from the energy savings estimates. I list some of these questions in the paper, but they would require a longer discussion. So I just conclude by saying that we see potential for advanced monitoring and verification to open new perspective for building programs, but we need more piloting and we need more data. So even in the US, where this is picking up, the programs in the residential sector are only starting. So once we get those evaluations back from the US, we would know more about how the practice could evolve also here in the EU. Also, I didn't discuss dim savings methods in detail, but they have a number of benefits, and they simplify the administration of programs. And as we were discussing in the previous presentation, there is always a balance to be found between simplicity and accuracy. And for the moment, I think further research will be needed to explore the cost and benefits of dim savings approaches and the new method savings approaches that could be emerging. And I think definitely there is also a need to make sure that there is sufficient efforts in the evaluation of programs using dim savings to make sure that we get things right. So I'm really happy to hear your feedback and questions. Thank you.
Unmute, Fiona.
Sorry, I think that's the first time I managed to do that, but hey, thank you very much. That was really interesting and it has generated some questions. So we'll start straight off with those. So the first one was from Dominique also. Sorry if I said that wrong. How do you separate the effects of the behavior of households and bad quality of workmanship when the expected savings aren't delivered?
So how to separate the behavior savings and the equipment savings? That's the...
So if you don't get the savings you're expecting, it might be from a number of different causes. How do you identify that?
Yeah, so I think when in these programs that we're looking at in the residential sector, the aggregator is dealing with a portfolio of buildings. So basically, buildings are behaving in a completely unrational way, and they don't actually fit into the prediction. It is possible for the aggregator to simply not consider these buildings and not claim savings coming from these buildings. This might make more sense than actually going and do on-site checks, but I guess there is a balance to do. between the service that is provided and the fee, the rate you get from the utility for doing those services. So I would say how it is possible to distinguish what's going on. I think there has been some very good progress in the methodologies and in identifying what's going on. But from what I read from existing literature, nothing is perfect. And at some point, you need a person behind the screen to try to figure out what's going on. I also read that in some programs, you have several steps that are taken before actually deciding what to do with the building. So sometimes it's easier to just pick up the phone and find out what's going on in the building, because you might have a surprise. It's just something that was not planned at all. So this is the problem also of non-routine events, which is heavily discussed in this literature about method savings approach, and where there is no automatized way of dealing with this non-routine events. So at the end, you still need people in there.
Yeah, eventually artificial intelligence, as it were, can only take you so far. Thank you.
Yes.
That's great. So another question, this time from Jean-Sebastian Brock. When you speak about P4P for groups of buildings, does it mean using methods such as randomized control trials to monitor and assess the energy savings?
When we use savings for a group of buildings, what happens is that let's say the methodology before it's running is being tested so that it's accurate for the type of building groups that it's being applied to. So you have the phase where the aggregator would actually test the methodology, and I think that's the moment where you apply different methods to make sure that the methodology is running. Once the methodology is running, in theory, as I said, you get you spend much less time on verification processes than you would with other methods. So the idea is that things become automatized and you don't have to intervene, but the real work takes place before things are starting. And I really invite you to check what the Sensei project is doing on that. And it is explained much better than I can explain here in this session. The way the methodology can be fine-tuned to fit with the building's portfolio is really interesting.
Okay, one question before we move on to the next speaker, please. So this is from Stefan Thomas. Thanks, Marianne. Agree that pay performance includes metering that can be used, but the baseline will probably be based on no action, while for Article 7 national reporting, materiality is needed. That is, excluding cases when the action would have been done another way, for example, by the building owner themselves, maybe later or with less savings. Do you also see this as a problem and how to deal with it? And if so, have you thought how to deal with it?
Yeah. So for Article 7, indeed, this issue of materiality and additionality needs to be taken into account. And there are ways to deal with that, and probably one way to do it is to have a questionnaire for each project participant to check a couple of parameters before entering into the contract with the building. But indeed, so there will need to be program managers will need to take a decision whether they calculate they check materiality, rather they check additionality at the buildings level, or if they make assumption for the whole portfolio. And that's actually, I have to say, I don't know how this is done yet in California. We are still waiting for the first evaluations. And that is one open question which I have put in my paper. We will need to see how they are doing it, because in California, they also have some additionality requirements to the savings they're doing. So I'd like to see how this is done once the evaluation reports are coming in. What is possible is that aggregators would be rewarded on gross savings, and then the member states would use actually the net savings to report to the Commission. So they would do an additional calculation, and they would require, of course, the aggregator to collect the right information from building owners in order to make those calculations. But because you want to give the right incentive to do the things you want to do, it will depend on the member state's priority. And then they will have to adjust the calculation for Article 7, the same way they're doing it right now with energy efficiency obligation schemes.
Thank you, that's great. We've got another question, but we're running a bit behind now, so I think we'll need to move on to our next speaker. Thank you very much. So next we have monitoring the climate and energy policy implementation, how to make a step forward. This is from Barbara Vishnovic. I hope that's slightly less bad than the other ways I was saying it earlier. She is an energy efficiency expert at Josef Stefan Institute, Energy Efficiency Center in Slovenia. Currently, her work is focused on monitoring and reporting on implementation of climate mitigation measures, including reporting on the implementation of the Energy Efficiency Directive. So please can we have Barbara's presentation? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Barbara and I'm coming from Slovenia, where I work in the Energy Efficiency Center of the Josef Stefan Institute in Ljubljana. Today I'm going to talk about the Climate Action Mirror. That is actually an integrated national climate action monitoring system, which was primarily developed to monitor the implementation of climate mitigation measures. The main objectives of the system are to ensure high quality information, to improve the access to that information, and to use that information for the implementation of the plan, do, check, act cycle for short-term corrective actions, and also to provide specific guidelines for mid and long-term planning. We developed the Climate Action Mirror in 3 annual cycles, started in 2018. And now the information collected and the analysis and results prepared are gathered within 30 parts, which are available online. The mirror was prepared within the LIFE Climate Path 2050 project. In that project, we, besides this monitoring system, prepared also models and projections for GHG emissions for Slovenia by 2030 and 2050 as an input for the long-term low-emission strategy of Slovenia by 2050. In the first part of the mirror, we evaluate the compliance with targets Slovenia set in accordance with the effort sharing decision, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and the Renewable Energy Directive. That way, we collected the information on progress towards these targets in one place, because before that, each of these targets were monitored or evaluated by different ministries in different reports. In such a way, we streamlined the climate-related monitoring and reporting regarding the decarbonization and energy efficiency dimensions of the Slovenian National Energy and Climate Plan in one system. Then, besides these main indicators, we added to the mirror also sectoral progress tracking indicators with the aim to describe the impact of the measures taken. So the aim of these indicators is actually to show the stronger and weaker points of the climate actions, and also to support the design of those already mentioned short-term corrective actions and specific guidelines for mid and long-term planning. Currently, we have 29 sectoral progress tracking indicators, plus additional 4 in the EU ETS sectors. And here to the right, you can see an example of such an indicator for the building sector. This is the cumulative floor area of energy renovated buildings in the public sector, where you can see that we are quite well on track towards the 2020 target. All the indicators are also available online, the full version in Slovene language and a shorter version also in English. Here you can see an example of a summary of sectoral indicators where we, besides the information of the indicator state in the year observed, we included also the information on the annual indicative target and the 2020 target. And then we used colors to show whether the annual indicative target has been achieved or not, and also to show what's the impact of the current situation on the midterm emissions. And as you can see here, where the indicators for the transport sector are presented, that we are not doing very well, as most of the indicators are colored red. So you have seen that sectoral indicators give us a kind of quantitative information about what's happening. But there are also some measures, for example, preparation of legislation or measures in the area of promotion, information and trainings and so on, which cannot be directly assigned the quantitative impacts, but their failure can still hinder the implementation of other measures or even the achievement of targets. That's why we develop between the mirror also qualitative overviews of the implementation of measures. And now we have in these catalog forums almost 100 climate mitigation measures presented, including the measures in the LULUCF and the EU ETS sectors. And these measures are implemented by 14 different ministries and institutions. The important aspects of these qualitative overviews are that they are prepared by sectoral experts, that they are prepared in cooperation and in close consultation with stakeholders, and that they include also the recommendations for decision makers. So these recommendations for the design of short-term corrective actions. In the presentation of measures in the catalog forum, we included general description and a legal and strategic background, and the implementation in the previous year, and also the planned implementation in the current and the following year, where we included also the quantified effects, if available. And the important part of this catalog forms are also the recommendations I already mentioned several times. And in over 2 last years, in 2019 and 2020, we prepared almost 150 recommendations for short-term corrective actions. We included in the mirror also a financial overview of the funds used to finance these climate mitigation measures, including the investments triggered by those incentives and the impacts these incentives have on GHG emissions reductions. We are currently covering 3 major sources of incentives. These are the energy efficiency contribution in the price of energy, which is managed by the Eco Fund, Climate Change Fund, and the Cohesion Fund. And you can see here in the graph to the right that in 2016 and 2017, the amount of incentives paid was quite low in comparison to the years before or after. And a very important recommendation came out of that. And actually, in terms of job creation and stable budgeting flow and economic growth, and also the recovery after the coronavirus pandemic, it's very important that the incentives are constantly available and that the investments are distributed as evenly as possible. We also included in the mirror measures in focus, actually in each annual cycle 3 measure, that means 9 measures altogether. We selected measures due to their underachievement in terms of expected effects and implementation dynamics, and we performed their detailed analysis. Here you can see some example, for example, the electric mobility, the district heating and energy poverty. And I have to say that the results and analysis of some of those measures in focus gained a significant response from the general public and the press. And last but not least, a very important part of the climate action mirror is also communication and close consultation with stakeholders. We organized several events for stakeholders. The most important are for sure preparatory workshops and workshops for measures in focus, where we presented preliminary results. We prepared and we discussed the recommendations with stakeholders, and then at the Climate Action Mirror presentation events, we presented the final result and the selected recommendations to the policymakers, decision makers, to the press and general public. And at that occasion, we published also highlight reports, press releases, we organized press conferences, and all that resulted in 110 articles in different national and local media, on TV, radio, in daily newspapers, in magazines, and so on. And the results of the mirror were also widely used and quoted by different stakeholders for different purposes, for example, by the Eco Fund, local communities, NGOs, citizens' initiatives, and so on. And to conclude, what we would like to emphasize is that we developed the system in 3 annual cycles in close consultation with stakeholders, which gave us an opportunity to learn and to adapt the system to the needs of stakeholders as much as possible. Then we would like to emphasize the importance of preparation of recommendations for the design of short-term corrective actions, again in close cooperation with stakeholders. The recommendations present a kind of link between this monitoring, reporting, check phase of the PDCA cycle with the act phase of that cycle. And we also presented the results and analysis to the policymakers and decision makers, and by that we hope we encourage them to use available analysis and results more to track the progress of the implementation of climate actions. And also based on the results of Mirror every year, also this official annual report on the implementation of the operational program for the GHG emissions reductions by 2020 is prepared and presented to the government. We also think that the mirror is a good basis for climate-related monitoring and reporting under the decarbonization and energy efficiency dimension of the Slovenian National Energy and Climate Plan until or by 2030. And what we would like to underline one more time is that we find an active participation of stakeholders as essential to move beyond merely monitoring and reporting. And that would be all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Barbara. That was great. I've got some questions while we wait for the attendees to spring into life and transfer them over. So you stress in the paper and in your presentation the importance of stakeholders. How easy was it to engage with them? Were some people quite sort of resistant to it? And if so, how did you persuade them to be involved?
I actually think that people at first they maybe have some, they didn't come very easily because they thought they are going to be judged for what they are going to say. So I think that the first two workshops were, for example, for me really difficult because I thought they were really giving out everything that was going wrong in the places they are working, because they are actually, I think this level of the public employees, they are probably not heard enough by higher levels. So I think that we needed those two workshops. They really kind of started to just to throwing things out, and afterwards they kind of discovered that they are actually, we really wanted to hear them, to hear what's wrong and what would they like to improve, because they are the ones which are nearest to the measures. And so I think they were coming to the workshops quite, except for the Ministry of Finance, other ones, they were quite well involved in these workshops and also quite active in those workshops.
Great, thank you. It must have been very satisfying when what you were doing was reported and used by other organizations. Which do you think, do you have a personal favorite? Was there one thing they reported and you thought, yes, we've really hit home there?
Well, I think that we were really happy because we have taken into the focus this energy poverty measure, and this was also taken into media quite much. So especially because we had allocated some money for that from the cohesion fund, but it was not used. So I think it's great that the pressure was afterwards so big that this started to go into the implementation. So it's not, like saying afterwards, okay, we can move this money for some other purpose because, well, we didn't manage to do it for what it was primarily intended to.
Oh, that's great. It must be very satisfying when you've made a difference, and especially on such an important topic. Okay, well, yeah, I'm afraid we need to move on to our next speaker. So over to Jessica.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Barbara, for an interesting presentation. I have the pleasure of introducing our final speaker for today, Dana D'Souza, who has been working with Skumat's Economic Research Associates for more than 12 years and has experience with process evaluations, market progress research, non-energy benefits and net to gross analysis, and best practice projects for clients across North America and internationally. And today, Dana is going to talk to us about Likert surveys and scales, and are they too simple simplistic, better and more useful alternatives in 4 applications in energy efficiency. We will hear the presentation from Dana, and then in the Q&A, we will also be joined by Dana's co-author on this paper, Lisa Skumatz. But we begin with Dana and your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for attending our session. My name is Dana D'Souza with Skumatz Economic Research Associates. I'll be discussing Likert scales and alternatives. Our paper is titled Likert scales are too simplistic, better and more useful alternatives in energy efficiency. Our company, eceee, is an economic and research consulting firm. We do work in energy and evaluation surveys and validations. In my 12 years with eceee, I have conducted work in non-energy benefit, process evaluation, market research, and have done quite a bit of interview work and survey work for energy clients across the United States and international. I'll be going briefly over background of Likert scales, the review of alternatives, and how that can apply to energy evaluation programs. So Likert scales are commonly used. I think most people have at some point taken a survey using a Likert scale, asking you how often you use something or how important something is. I'll let you refer to the paper for some of the specifics on it. But I think in energy efficiency evaluations, you find that they are used to find importance, frequency, agreement, likelihood, as in how likely are you to participate in a program. Usually they're 5-point scales with a neutral center point. They can be 7 or 9 or even 11-point scales for more granularity. They can be unipolar, meaning that they would just use one attribute, such as satisfaction. It would be not satisfied to extremely satisfied, or they can be bipolar, which means that they would use 2 attributes, dissatisfied, for example, to very satisfied. And points will range from 1 to 5 assigned, 1 for strongly disagree, 5 for agree. They're used in energy surveys for net to gross process evaluation. They do provide a much better insight than a binary type question that would have yes or no. However, when analyzing responses, the responses are often treated as linear with equidistant values between the intervals. What that means, again, that is if you are applying that 1 to 5 scale, you assume that a 4, which would be disagree, would be much more negative than a 3 or a 2, but the scales are not linear. They don't say that the strength or the intensity of an attitude is linear and that it can be measured using ordinal scale response in a quantitative way, except to say that the responses can be ranked. So even Likert noted that justifiable analysis is only when applied to higher or lower, not to proportional. So if you're asking someone to rate a program, moving from very poor up to poor is not necessarily equal as moving from good to excellent on the opposite side. And Likert's simplicity seems to encourage that misuse, that shortcut analysis to using it as a linear scale, and that each of the points are equidistant from each other. One of the other things that we have noted with Likert scale is that there seems to be a bias on the extremes, that some people do not want to appear extreme, and so they are afraid to mark either strongly agree or strongly disagree. And so sometimes assigning unitary differences across the entire scale is particularly problematic. So VAS, or visual analog scale, is another evaluation technique that we've looked at. It is non-linear, non-interval. It has the 2 extremes, and participants can put their answer anywhere between 1 to 100. And they've found on a lot of studies that it has less end aversion bias than Likert. It can also be difficult, though, for respondents to find where exactly they fit in that large scale between 1 and 100. A lot of this look into different valuation approaches started when Lisa Skumatz was first looking at how to measure and monetize non-energy benefits or non-energy impacts. some of the first things were to look at willingness to pay, asking a participant how much was comfort worth to them. It was often difficult for participants to say an exact dollar amount. Again, Likert and Voss were considered, but they also had those analysis issues that we discussed before. And SERA came across labeled scaling, and there's various different ones in here, but basically labeled scaling is a hybrid that measures degrees of difference. It was used to determine intensity, such as with flavors, that were greater or less than a standard. It's nonlinear and it shows relative comparisons. And SERA found that this could be adapted to non-energy benefit work. A participant might not be able to say that increased comfort is worth X amount of money, but they might be able to say it is more or less valued to them than another value. And using magnitude labels such as somewhat more valuable and also a percent more or less valuable, we were able to come up with a multiplier to be used in valuation. Some of the key things I'd like to point out for labeled scaling is that these academic values are well estimated with confidence intervals and have been used and tested in multiple studies. SERA has used them in many of our studies as well, and found that the values are very consistent. I think one of the key things is that the values are not linear here. Instead, those distances vary meaningfully with the different label modifiers. I won't be talking about non-energy benefit work here as much as other evaluation work. One of the things to note on this scale is that, this table is looking at the different scales, that the extremes are all the same with the 100 or the minus 100, and all of them have neutral set at 0. One of the other things is that it is not linear and that the negative and positive values differ slightly for similar labels if you're looking at moderately on the positive side versus moderately on the negative side. This graph shows how Likert scales are applied in a linear fashion. It's the dotted line versus how the other labeled factors are nonlinear and the comparison between the two. This is a comparison of academic labeled scale multiplier values within different samples. Some work that we did on non-energy benefits. If you take a look at, say, very much more, you can see that it's really close between the different interviewees. So some were academic, commercial businesses, residential builders, and you can see that for the most part, they're close. Some of the smaller sample sizes, which were street light designers, they vary a little bit, but really they are very close for other studies that had larger samples. So labeled scaling can be used in several EM and V applications, process evaluations, net to gross, free ridership and spillover, also better worse program options and barrier analysis. Evaluating energy efficiency programs means that you have to figure out their impact above and beyond what would have happened without the program. And in really simple terms, you can take a look at the energy savings. Say you're looking at LED light bulbs, the energy savings per light bulb times the number of light bulbs that you sold or were purchased through the program, and that would be the gross savings. You also need to consider what would have happened without the program, and that's part of where net to gross comes into. It starts at 100 and then 100% or 1 if there's no free ridership or spillover. And basically a very simple calculation of this would be the sum of that 1 minus free ridership plus spillover. Free ridership, again, is people that got your incentive, but they would have done this anyway. They would have purchased or had planned to purchase the same number and the same amount of bulbs, but they went ahead and participated in your program. That's free ridership. It's not really something that you can claim credit for. The other one would be spillover, and this is where people maybe participated in your program or heard about the program from neighbors, and they went ahead and purchased additional bulbs outside of the program, such as the program was for their home, and they went ahead and purchased it for their office. So, so that's a plus for you. But those are some really quick overviews. So net to gross would be 1 minus the free ridership plus the spillover. Again, I'll go over also better and worse program options and barrier analysis for this. So if we want to apply the labeled scaling to process evaluation, it's really just as easy to apply. You can still use a 5-point scale, and you just apply different values to it than you would using the Likert scale. So it's, again, you can still use a 5-point scale, but whereas Likert would put equidistance between each of the responses, and if you notice that the extremely satisfied is twice as much as the moderately one. If you look over on the labeled scaling, you can see that they are they do not go quite as extreme. They have a better ratio between, it's not directly linear, and they are more meaningful and important. And again, if you look at the neutral, neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, on the Likert side, you have it at 50%, whereas on the labeled scaling, you have it at 0 in the neutral. The difference between a 2 and a 3 is not the same as the difference between the 1 and 2. But again, it's just as easy to apply as the Likert. Again, you're just applying the different values. And so this is an example of how we recalculated Likert scale for a statewide net to gross calculations. And we took a look at what their existing survey had, and we corrected the items that they assumed in their survey had the exact same difference between the responses. Again, we just put in the different values, but used the same idea of the scoring, and corrected the figures. All the figures are in the paper, but what we found that by fixing just several of the steps, it led to a 5.5% difference in the net to gross estimate. In this example, we are looking at a community that is trying to decide which strategies would be easiest or hardest to implement to reduce their greenhouse gas strategies, including energy efficiency and recycling. And what you see is that in the center, that degree of difficulty ranges from 1 to 5, and it shows that the hardest or the most extremely difficult are only a ratio of 5 to 1. Whereas when you're looking at some of the other scales, you can see that there is 9 times harder when you're looking at trying to install certain programs. Process evaluations often include taking a look at barriers, and commonly Likert scales are used for that. Again, it's treating them as linear that is the issue in that analysis. If you have a barrier in one area that is a 1 and a barrier in another area that is a 2, you can't really say that the barrier with a 2 is twice as much of a problem as the barrier that is a 1. Also, when you take a look at the different scores and you have a score average of a 3.2 versus an average of a 3.0, it can be really difficult to tell what that means and to tell where do you go from here based on those. Using a simple labeled scaling would definitely give you a little bit more information. It'll give you some ratios, and it'll give you defensible quantitative scores for comparison. If you want to go beyond that, suggestion 2 would be to take a look at using some non-energy benefit techniques to give you a dollar valuation on that. It provides some very good insight, and it can also give you some ratios onto how much more and what is next. The paper goes into all of those details, so I won't go over them here. But again, I want to thank you for attending this session. And I think that Likert is a very good scale, but is often misused during the analysis. And again, it's important to remember with Likert, a 2 to a 1 is not the same as moving from a 5 to a 4. There's much better suggestions out there, such as labeled scaling. And our advice is to take a look at some of those other ideas, especially when you're considering process evaluations and any type of net to gross rankings or barrier analysis. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, have we lost Dana in the meantime?
Nope, I'm
Dana,
still there.
you're here. Okay, I see.
I'm still here.
Good. All right, Dana. So while we're waiting to see if we have any responses, questions, or comments on the Whova platform, a couple of questions that I have as well. So you start off with this paper also talking about, okay, there's Likert or Likert. We also have this we can avoid by using something else, the Likert-Likert divide that my colleagues and I are on. And why do you think it remains so prevalent? Is it just because it's simple, or is it because maybe others don't know about the alternatives? It seems like there's a convincing case for moving beyond it. So what's your take on why this is still so prevalent?
Well, I think it's definitely because it's simple. And also, if you look at other past surveys, it's something that you're going to see just hundreds of examples of, thousands of examples of. And so when people go to look at the different types of surveys to do that, they just have so many examples of it. And I think if it's not brought to your attention that there is an issue with how you score it, then you wouldn't really see any reason not to use it, maybe.
Yeah, I think for those in the audience too, reading through the paper, you see lots of different examples of how the alternative methods add a layer of more sophisticated analysis. Because I think you do argue as well that Likert you can use as long as you're not misusing, as long as you're not trying overstating, but then you're actually very simple in your analysis is your problem. Is that
Right.
correct in understanding? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you can use Likert if you want to, but it's going to really bound the analysis that you can do and what you can say about your results, and you have to be much more careful about what you can say about it. So we have here a comment from Erwin Cornelis in the Whova. Thanks for your interesting presentation, Dana. I liked Likert until now. So my question is, yeah, you have a convert, and this is a question I have for you too. As you are now gaining experience, many years of experience having moved away from Likert yourselves, have you convinced a lot of other people, a lot of other researchers, evaluators, those evaluating to move beyond Likert as well?
Dana, do you want me to take that one?
Sure, go ahead, Lisa.
I will say that we hope that this paper helps make that move. We labeled it Likert is not sufficient for a reason, and we haven't had a lot of impact so far, but I do oversee the energy efficiency work in 3 states, and for all the work done, all the process evaluation work done there, we have made them not use Likert. So
okay, so yeah, it maybe involves examples. I think what is good with the paper as well and your presentation is that you give examples of the difference it makes using Likert versus using the alternative methods, and what can't be said with Likert analysis there. So hopefully you do see more of the correct or a better, let's say, a better method for the questions that are being asked, because often I think you've given some convincing examples of where Likert was not the correct method for that question, or you can find out so much more by using an alternative method. Okay. At this point, I want to open it up. Maybe some of our other speakers also have questions about Likert. Maybe our speakers here, Dana and Lisa, have questions for our other speakers, because we have 6 minutes left to this session. So a very truncated final discussion. But if there's anything else, I invite the speakers all to show your videos, to unmute. And at this point, is there anything questions that you had for each other's presentations or comments. Marianne, do you have, sorry, I see you unmuted, so I assume that you might have something to say, but if I put you on the spot, maybe you do.
Yes, I was wondering if the other speakers see a potential to increase the reliability of energy savings estimates with the upcoming revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive.
Okay, so I don't know if, do our American speakers know about a lot about the Energy Efficiency Directive and what's going on here in Europe, perhaps at this conference you have as well. But we do have some, I think Nella and Barbara, do you have a weigh in on the Energy Efficiency Directive?
Yeah, it was a bit, yeah, how do you, yeah, sorry, how do you say exactly the question, Mariam? Because it's, you said the revision of the EED, yeah, more stricter targets, and then?
Yeah, do you think that there's also a way to revise the methodologies so that we get more reliable savings estimates?
You're asking Dana and me?
No, no. I think she's asking everyone if you have an opinion on whether this revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive is an opportunity to revise methodologies. Possibly, but I will leave my opinion out. Let's listen to the opinion of Nella. You have an opinion about it, I think.
Yeah, of course, it is indeed an opportunity to do so. And yeah, then there is then the question, do you go to more towards guidance and being more directive and to be in the same context, or is it do you still stay at a more simple, doable level? And yeah, and from our project StreamSave, it is more making sure that in the area of the deemed savings, it is as doable as possible, and that there are some methodologies in place that can be used as a kind of a guidance, but and that there can be put more material in it so that it is also more easy to estimate savings for technologies, for instance, which are not so easy to do so at the moment. For instance, if you look to our priority action list, some of them are less taken into account so far in the EED, such as the PAX technologies, but also in electric vehicles, there's still potential to improve, or in the transport area in general. So it could be a momentum to highlight it, and mainly to give some ideas or methodologies that can inspire the member states.
Thank you. I'm sorry, this was a very EU-centric the first one that came to my mind.
Yep. I think we can generalize a little bit more about when and where the leverage points are for changing methodologies. So all of you are in projects that are trying to do that. So there is a project leverage opportunity to intervene and change methodologies. Lisa and Dana, we heard that, you know, in your projects, you're going basically stakeholder by stakeholder to change the way that they're looking at methodologies. Are you also trying to work on a policy level?
There aren't really, I guess the way to do that would be to look at the protocols that are used for process and impact evaluations, and if as they change, then we have an opportunity.
Yep. Lisa froze there, but I can guess this is like one of those complete the sentences that as protocols change, that's where the opportunity is. It's coming very slowly.
Yes. And I would agree that would be a completion of the sentence.
Yep. Yep. And I think so we have the projects to influence methodologies, but we also have policy changes and protocol changes. Barbara, did you have anything from your point of view beyond the project where you see ways that, or intervening points, leverage points for changing methodologies?
Yeah, well, in general, I agree with Nell. We are also involved in the same project, a colleague of mine. We actually are one of the countries which have methodologies, and we are trying to influence the ministry to, kind of update them regularly. But we are, well, I think that we are not very successful in that.
So you might have to write reflect on the methodology for changing methodologies.
I do have one other suggestion for how that might happen. Sorry. And that is we're seeing the growth because it's a fairly concentrated industry in the US for who does the evaluation work. And so as we influence those consultants, the leading consultants, those methods also spread.
Yeah, so we can influence on the policy level, Barbara, as you say, which is difficult, or find the stakeholders with whom it resonates to change as well. Okay, I think that we've had a very nice discussion, very interesting presentations and a reflection on methodology. Thank you very much to all of our speakers for a very nice last session of panel 4. I will remind people about the agenda that we have well, at this point, a little less than 15-minute break, and then there are informal sessions, and that later on in a couple of hours there's also the party that we have going on. And some last words from Fiona, my co-chair.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thanks to everybody who's presented and thanks to everybody who's attended. And I hope you all have enjoyed it as much as I have and found it as interesting. So it's been, yeah, been really good. Thanks, guys.
And it will be nice when we, in a few weeks, when we can see the final papers and also go back through a lot of these issues. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.